That would have been so much better.
If you guys would want
Okay.
second, I think you could have won third.
So today we're going to talk about verifying identities. And so first of all, we've got a few tips that kind of can help. The first tip is to pick the most complicated side, and that's the side you're going to work down. The second tip, look for the number 1 in a trig function squared, or look for 2 trig functions squared and substitute. Now those are taken from the Pythagorean identities. Okay, so those are taken from the 3 Pythagorean identities that you should already have in your notes somewhere. Third step, rewrite everything in terms of sine and cosine. And the fourth tip is to factor something out on one side of the equation. Okay, and so those are just some tips. Now that's not a standard guideline as to what you're going to do in every problem, but hopefully that'll give you some hints. And so if you look at this is the first one we're going to look at. This is cosecant squared x minus 1 divided by cosecant squared x. Now our goal is to prove that that equals cosine squared x. Now a little bit about proofs, at least in terms of this. Okay? A little bit about this. This is called verifying identities. It's the same thing as proof, so I will probably use those synonymously. A little bit about this. You can only work down one side of the equation. So whatever side you pick, that's the side you can only work down. Okay, so obviously when tip 1 was to work down the most complicated side, the most complicated side you can see will be this side right here. So we're going to start by working down that side. And so there are 2 ways to do this. 1, I could rewrite everything in terms of sine and cosine. Or 2, I can notice that cosecant squared minus 1 is a trig function squared in the number 1. Can you substitute in anything for that?
Yeah. Cotangent squared.
Does that equal cotangent squared, or is it negative cotangent squared?
No,
It's
cotangent
just
squared.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. So we've got cotangent squared x. And I'm going to do this. Now remember, that's the only side we can work down is the left side. Now notice all I did is I'm one of those ones that always hated using like a lot of space that way, so I'd always write the division signs with on one line. So then now an option would be to do what? Since you've already substituted in trig function squared in the number 1, what would be another thought?
Sine and cosine.
Sine and cosine, yep. So cotangent is cosine squared over sine squared. I'm going to divide that by cosecant squared. Cosecant squared is 1 over sine squared. Now notice each step I'm always putting the equals cosine squared. Okay, yes, you need to do that. So what you're seeing up here is exactly what you should be writing down.
Oh, so this
Okay.
is the proof? Like
This is the actual proof itself. Now, when I divide 2 fractions, what do you have to do?
Switch it and multiply.
Multiply by the reciprocal. So now when you've done that, in looking at that, what do you notice?
Cancel out. Bam,
Those
bam.
cancel. It's going to leave me with cosine squared x, which is exactly what I needed to get. And I am done. Now, as with anything, when you have a proof that's done, we need to use a box with a square. And so you've verified that identity. And you're done with the problem.
It's like a square pineapple.
The box with the square is kind of like the sentence, or the period is at the end of a sentence. It means you're done. Okay, you verified what needed to be verified.
Proof accomplished.
Okay.
So you want to just end up with
Proof
the
accomplished.
same equals the
Yes,
same.
and that brings up a good point. The very last line should be identical on both the left and the right. And if it's not, then that's not the very last line. You need to evidently go one more step. So let's look at another one. Okay, secant squared cotangent squared minus 1 equals cotangent squared.
Well, we know that cotangent squared minus 1. We know what that is.
Okay, so secant squared cotangent squared theta minus 1 equals cotangent squared theta. So what's the most complicated side?
Left.
The left side. Now in looking at this, I've got secant squared times cotangent squared. So as it is written, I can't substitute in anything for it right now. So the next option would be to rewrite everything in terms of sine and cosine. I know that secant is 1 over cosine squared. Cotangent is cosine squared over sine squared. And I need to show that that whole thing equals cotangent squared.
Theta.
Oh, first you cross the cosines out.
Cross them out, yep.
Bam, bam.
And so I'm left with 1 over sine squared.
Which we know.
We
is
know
cosine.
that is cosecant squared. So you could have put another step in there and put 1 over sine squared minus 1. Or you could just go ahead and go to the blue step as I have. Now you know that you have a trig function squared in the number 1.
Equals cotangent squared?
And you know
Cotangent
from the
squared.
previous problem, because we just looked at that, that this equals cotangent squared theta.
Whoa, that equals,
And there you go, you're done.
that's like a green banana.
So see, these in a way are a little easier because you know where you need to finish.
Yeah, so this is nothing like what we did.
Well, yeah, kind of is. They're like easier versions.
Yeah.
So let's look at another one.
They look easier.
Greek letter alpha looks like the fish. So we have secant alpha, cosecant alpha, tangent alpha minus 1 equals tangent squared alpha.
My land. Oh, what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to put all those.
Oh, first.
Yep.
Cosine.
Cosine side.
That
they're-
side.
they're
So
all
what do we got?
timesing.
What is it? 1 over,
Cosine.
Cosine
okay?
times 1 over sine, just sine over cosine.
So once again, we're only gonna work down one side, so we're choosing the left side. So I'll let you go ahead and get that down. You can probably already see where we're going. What ends up happening?
Sines.
Cancel.
And that leaves me with 1 over,
Cosine squared.
Are they gonna all be that easy? Because I feel like that's too easy.
I
okay?
feel like we're gonna get to the thing and it's gonna be really
So
hard.
now, what do you know?
Secant squared.
1 over
Bam.
cosine is secant squared.
Minus 1, which we also know is tangent squared.
Now, a lot of people would say, I'm gonna stop right here, but you can't, because if you remember what I said, the left has to be identical to the right. So we have to go one step further. Now, if you didn't catch why we're jumping to tangent squared, that's an identity, and I know that secant squared minus 1 is equivalent to tangent squared.
Can we do one that doesn't equal? Oh, that's not.
They all will.
They all will?
All right, so we're gonna look at one more for today.
I'm kind of getting it.
And here's the last one we're gonna look at.
Like, I'm really bored.
So here you go, sine of beta over 1 minus cosine beta equals cosecant beta plus cotangent beta.
No.
Now, both sides are not in simplest form. Okay, I would probably pick the left side just because it has a fraction and we can do
I
a little
agree
bit more with that.
completely.
It has more stuff to do.
More stuff to do with it.
So we'd change, do you wanna change sine to 1 over?
So what I would do, if you remember, I'm just looking strictly at the left side. This is one where we want to rewrite it without the fraction. So this is pretty much what we had in section 1. They titled it rewrite without the fraction. So does anybody remember, if I was just given sine over 1 minus cosine, how could I get rid of the fraction?
Sine times cos, or, gosh.
Times 1 over.
Times what?
minus cosine.
1
Oh, yeah.
plus cosine. So what I'm going to do is multiply. Do we remember what we called that?
The conjunction.
The
Conjugate.
conjugate. So I'm going to multiply by the
You're right.
conjugate.
So how do you know what you should do? Like, that's my problem, like, how
It's
do you-
just one of those things, try something. The question is, how do you know what to do? And the answer is, try something. I tried to give you some tips that would help out. Okay, in this case, in looking at it, you're like, well, I've got a fraction there, I can't write it in terms of sine and cosine, I can't substitute anything in. Next option, I know with a fraction I can multiply by the conjugate, that might get me where I need to go. So it's just kind of one of those things, trial and error practice. And so in looking at this, I'm going to go ahead and distribute sine to each. So I end up with sine beta plus sine beta times cosine beta. And what am I going to divide that by?
1
Minus
cosine squared.
cosine squared beta.
Wait, how did you get that on the top?
I distributed sine to each of those. Okay, I distributed sine to the one and then to the cosine. So next step, once again, I have everything in terms of sine and cosine except for the denominator. I can do something too. And what can I do to the
Sine
denominator?
squared.
Sine squared. So you've got sine of beta plus sine of beta cosine beta. And that's going to equal sine squared beta.
Isn't it sine squared beta? Or you can't do that since they're.
Nope.
What evil word you call that?
So then now, notice where I need to go. I need to go to cosecant plus cotangent. So does anybody have any ideas maybe as to what I can do now?
You can take out a sign from the top on your side. No, never mind. Just kidding. Oh,
Okay, this is the thing. On the right side, I've got two separate quantities, correct?
yeah.
On the left side right now, I still have one. So good rule of thumb on here would maybe be to see if I can split these up, and I can. If I get sine beta over sine squared beta, and we end up actually having about 2 steps left after this. So what I've done is I've tried to split this up because I know at the very end I've got 2 quantities here. Okay, so now what I can do,
Take a sign out on that side,
I can cancel a sign here and I'm left with 1 over sine.
which we know is cosine.
That's what
Right. Here I can cancel a sign out and I'm left with cosine over sine. And that's going to equal cosecant beta plus cotangent beta. And then my final step will be to rewrite those. We know 1 over sine is cosecant. And I know that cosine over sine is cotangent. And so there you go. Now, is that the only way? Is that the only way to solve that one? No, there actually is another way. It would be about the same in length, probably a little bit longer. Okay, but that would be not to distribute the sign at the start. But we could have eventually gotten there too.
See, that was like perfect while you were doing that, and I just.
So what I want you to work on for Thursday is page, oops, it skipped. Let's go back.
Thursday?
Yeah.
There we go.
It's Tuesday.
Oh my goodness. There we go, finally. Page 324, 1 through 9. So let's go ahead and look at page 324, 1 through 9. We went through an example of most every type of problem you're going to run into. So for Thursday, the second half of the, or actually, I take that back, you guys don't have the ITPS. This is actually due Wednesday. Okay?
We have them though.
What?
We have them.
I know, but not. So this is what I need you to do. I need you to work on this for tomorrow. I will answer questions at the start of the period. Okay, so work on 1 through 9 for tomorrow.